Hey everybody, welcome back. This is the DOS Trader Pro Coding Basics series. This is the fourth video. We're going to cover functions you need to know. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you do that. Give it a thumbs up. I'm going to be working on methods and all of the advanced scripting that comes after that. So if you want to be informed when videos come out, subscribe. Okay, we're going to dive into it here. So the first functions we're going to cover. I guess first I'll explain what a function is. Typically, a function returns a value. So, for example, you would have x equals abs minus 1. We'll cover what that does in a second. But basically, you have a variable that you're setting to the result of a function. Typically, some functions work independently of returning a value, and we'll cover those as well. But basically, you're calling something that's going to either do something or it's going to return something. So the very first one we're covering is ABS. We're going to cover the math functions first. So ABS is short for absolute. So where this comes in handy is say you have a number assigned to x, and say it could possibly be a positive number, it could be a negative number, you don't know. Your logic wants to assume that it's always going to be positive in a certain situation. So if that was to happen, say for example, we wanted to look and see if the absolute value of x was greater than 5, then do this. If you haven't watched the previous videos in this series that cover if-else expressions, you should probably go do that. Watch the variables and the methods videos as well, just so you're not falling behind in any of this. But basically, here we have x equaling minus 10. Well, if we said if x is greater than 5, being that x is negative 10, this would not be true, therefore this would not happen. But if we put an ABS around this, then negative 10 becomes 10. Basically, it just always strips off the negative, gives the absolute value. So then 10 is greater than 5, it would do this. So that can be handy in some cases, depending on what you're trying to build and whatnot. So that's what the ABS function does. The next function we're going to go with is the average function. So what average does is, say I want to know what the average of 1, 2, 3 is. It's going to take those numbers, add them together, divide by 3, and come up with the average. So if we had a bunch of variables, say we want to know what the average of x and y was, and assign that to z, then it's going to average those. And you can have as many numbers in here as you want, separated by commas. So again, that's the average function. The max function is another math function. Basically, it's going to get the maximum value. So if x was equal to 10 and y was equal to 5, this would make z equal to 10. And then min, of course, the minimum value. So again, you can have as many different values in here as you want, separated by commas. It'll always return what the max or the min or the average is for those. Another math function is square root. So if you want to know what the square root of 64 is, it's that simple to do that. I've never found a need in DOS to square root something. Not sure. Maybe there's some need to square root something. You can let me know in the comments if you use square root. Round. Now this one is very handy and used all the time. So typically what we would have is, let's say we have x is equal to montage. Actually, let's just go montage window is equal to get window object montage. And then we said say x is equal to round montage window dot bid, and we want to round it for some reason to 2 decimals. So what this would do is if the bid was, say we were trading something where the price is 90 cents, it's going to have 4 decimals on it. If for some reason we wanted to round that to 2, we could do it that way. We could also round it to 4 decimals. If you want to get rid of, say we're pricing a stock where the bid price is in the hundreds. So say it's $264 and we don't care about the cents. We want to remove the cents from the equation. You could say round to 0 decimals, which would round up or down to the nearest dollar. So it's 0 is one option. 2 is going to give you 2 decimals. 3 is going to give you 3. 4 is 4. 99 is 99 decimals. But where it gets interesting is in DOS, they've added some extra functionality here that isn't typical for a rounding statement. And so you can say, I'll just show you an example that they use. I haven't found a need for this, but let's say you had the number 345 and you wanted to round that to 400. Actually, let's change this to 100. That would round it down to 300. That would round 345 up to 400. So for even lots is what they're using it for. I'm assuming that's for the share lots. So, if you had an equation that calculated the number of shares you wanted to buy and you wanted to round it down to the nearest 100, you could do that. If you wanted to round the shares to buy, so say this was a variable of shares to buy based on some calculation that you did, this would round it down to the nearest 100, that would round it up to the nearest 100. If you wanted to change this to 102, you can then round it to the nearest, whatever you put in here, nearest dollar or nearest 25 cents, nearest 50 cents. It's if you're using 102 as your precision, which is the second iterator of this, or it's the second parameter rather of this function, then you have a third parameter you can use, which is what to round it to. The next option is going to be if we use 103. So if I was to change this to 103, it's going to return 123. Let's just put the example in that I'm reading so that you can see 123.456. This would round to 46 cents. So I guess that would be, I don't know when that would be handy. And I don't know why that's any different than just rounding to 2 decimals, because that would also round to 46 cents. Okay, now I'm going to cover the variable functions. So the first one we'll cover is delvar. So delvar is delete variable. So if we were to delete test, that would delete that variable. So say, for example, we have test equals 1. Then after running this, test would no longer exist. It would remove this entirely. You can also do test like that if you want in the quotes. Either one will work. If you were to, for example, say we had a variable called ABC, and let's say it was equal to 1, and let's say test was equal to ABC. If you took the quotes off, then it would delete the variable and it would resolve this because it's no longer surrounded by quotes. And this would resolve the ABC, which would be the same as typing ABC here, which would delete this variable and would not touch this variable. So that's very handy to know. And that can be handy if you're iterating through code and you've got, a loop ID or something like that. Then it would delete ABC1, ABC2, ABC3, and you're basically just having to say test in here. And, again, if that was handy, if you're wanting to delete variables that might exist that are variables. You can also use getVar, which if we were to change this, so then say we've got Z is equal to getVar. And what this is going to do is it's going to get the value and it's going to resolve this, which is going to resolve to ABC because it's not wrapped in quotes, which would be the same as typing this, which would then return 1. So this would return the value of the ABC variable. If we were to wrap this in quotes, it would get the value of test, which is ABC. And if you wanted to, you could have that in there. It's up to you. And the next one would be setVar. So we could say setVar, same logic. We could say we want the value to be 22. Okay, and then basically it's setting the variable test to 22. So that would overwrite this variable here. If we were to type in here and say ABC, it would replace the value of 1 in ABC. If we were to change this to a variable like this, it would resolve this. In this case, it would resolve it to ABC, which is the same as typing ABC, which would then replace 1. So hopefully that made sense. It's, again, this can either be the literal value or the literal name of the variable, or it can be a variable itself. And in that case, it would be resolving to whatever the value of that is. So for example, if test was equal to 3, this would throw an error because you can't name a variable 3. It's just not a valid variable name. So it would probably throw an error, I would imagine. Input. So this is used typically for variables. So we'll go, we'll just say question, and we'll say input, and we will say what is the amount, and then we will say we want a default of 0, and we want 1 line, which is the default if we didn't define it. So what this is going to do is this is going to pop up a modal window in DOS that says what is the amount, and it's going to have a 0 as the default number, and it's going to be 1 line high, so it's going to be a single line to type into. If we change this to 10, it would be a bigger entry field that had 10 lines, so you could write a paragraph if you wanted to. And so basically, this question, what is the amount, is going to come back with an answer. And at that point, this is going to have the value of whatever you type into that input box. So at that point, I guess this would be answer, right? And then you could utilize that, going down your code. There's also something called load var from file. I have used this. So you can have, this can be called test.txt, for example. And then what it's going, typically you would load this one first. So we'd say save var to file. And then what that's going to do is save all the variables currently defined in DOS at this very moment to a text.txt file. And you type in whatever name you want here, my vars, whatever you want. And then later, if you wanted to revert to this moment in time for all the values of your variables, you can run this. So where I found this is handy is on exit of DOS, I have an option where I can save all my vars to a file. And then when I load DOS again, so say I have to reboot my computer, I don't want to lose all my the statistics and what I'm watching and all of my stocks, how many I've traded, how many I'm winners on, how many I'm losers on. I want to pull all that back in so I can load all those variables back. Now, objects are not part of this, so you have to get creative in your logic. What I do is I actually dump a bunch of creatively named variables into my vars.txt. And then when I do my load vars, I convert them back to objects. It's a pain. I wish that they would dump the objects in there in a meaningful way, that I didn't have to code something to do that. I might do that in a future video and show you how I accomplish that. But that's the last two functions for variables. Some debugging functions. So you got message log, which, as you've seen in previous videos, you can put anything you want in there and it will log that to the message log. It's good for debugging. Something I haven't shown you is you can actually concatenate these by, whatever you've got for variables. You can just keep throwing them in here. And what it'll do is it'll output all of these onto one line. So that's definitely doable. It doesn't like that. It's complaining about 2 arguments. That's fine. That's just my editor. So it does accept this. You can put as many of these in there as you want. You could also, if you wanted to, just as easily do this. If these are all strings, you know, you can concatenate them this way as well. And then you could put in some extra spaces, and, you know, if you wanted to put spaces between variables, you could do this kind of thing, right? So, oops. So another one is message box. And so what the message box is going to do, I don't think it has any extra, no. So it's going to do the same thing, but it's just going to pop up a modal window. The bad thing about that is it ties up DOS, because as soon as the modal window pops up, it takes focus. And so if you're in the middle of a trade or in the middle of doing something, this is going to remove focus from what you're doing and pop up this message box, which you now have to deal with and close to regain access to everything you're trying to do. And so I never use message boxes for that reason, but you can if you want. So the next category for functions is going to be execution. So there's a function called exec for execute, and I kind of drafted up a little bit of a example here for you. So we have a variable called script. We're concatenating to that script, making it so that it equals, you know, $B, and we're adding 5 equals and then 3 colons. So what that's going to do is at the end of all of that, you're going to have a line of code that is basically, the script is going to be the equivalent of this. Okay. We're just building that. I'm just showing you an example that if you were to build code based on, you know, a bunch of conditions, you can then execute that script as if it ran right in the DOS editor, as if it was running right then and there. So if that's something you're compiling based on a whole bunch of stuff, and then you want to run the resulting script that is the result of a whole bunch of logic, that's where you use exec. It's going to basically, you know, this would output 3 in the message log because B5 would equal 3 because it's built this script and then you're executing that script. So I've never used it, but it looks handy. This I use a lot, which is exec hotkey. So what that does is when you create a hotkey, you give it a name, right? Every hotkey you have, you should be giving it a name. You should also have a naming convention similar to this. I avoid spaces in my hotkey names altogether. I uppercase everything. And then I also, in my scripts, I typically will, at the very beginning of them, put the name of the script. So visually, when I'm looking through my scripts, I'll just bring them up here. You can see that the script matches the name on every one of these, because occasionally I double click on the wrong one and paste the script in there, and then I'm trying to figure out what's going on. This is a really quick way for me to visually look through them and make sure they all match. So what that does is it just runs that hotkey. So you can execute as many of these as you want. You know, for example, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you'll see that I use this a lot. It's a way of not putting all your code in one file, breaking it into multiple files, and sometimes using those files multiple times. So you might have, for example, a hotkey that's like draw line. And before you, oops, don't know what I was typing there. So draw line. So you might have like line color equals whatever. Let's just say red. And then when it draws the line, this is going to be looking for a color. And then you might run this later in your code and you might have green, and you have this variable being used in draw line, and it now draws a green line. And obviously there's probably line price and line width and all kinds of other things, but it kind of gives you an idea. You can almost build your own functions, not really, but they kind of work the same way, so that you can have functionality in multiple ways without having to duplicate a bunch of code. So next one I'm going to review is ShellExecute, which this is used for typically putting things onto command line in Windows. So one example is this. So this is calling PowerShell and is getting process named DasTrader4 or DasTrader64 for each object. So if it's open twice, it's going to grab them both, and it's going to loop through them, and it's going to close the main window. And it's using the C temp directory as the default. What this basically does is it closes DOS. It's just an executable that exits DOS for you. So I have an exit button, and I've used this code to exit out of DOS for myself, so I don't have to click on File and scroll down to exit. It's quicker. Another example might be something like this. So here I'm calling curl.exe, and then I'm calling over to my API. I'm passing it my API key and the symbol I'm trading. And so this behind the scenes, behind DOS, will call that curl event and send it over to my API. So when I switch stocks, this is how I send the ticker over to my site, is by calling something like this using ShellExecute. The uses of this are almost endless because you're basically calling Windows command line, so you can have it do anything. Another executable would be wait, which is going to, there's a number of milliseconds. I don't use them. I did when I first started coding in DOS, thinking it made a difference. It created more problems than it solved. So I don't do this. This is 1 second because these are milliseconds. So, that's 1/10 of a second. This is 5 seconds. I don't like my script sitting there pausing and stuck. It doesn't do any good. So I've come up with other ways of making it so things wait. For example, set a variable to 1 every time the timer runs, increment it, and when it equals 4, have it do something so that you got a 3-second waiting period. I don't use wait. Get hotkey script. So what this one does is you can say, my script. Again, this would be a name of a hotkey, and you could say X. And so now the variable X would equal the value of all of the code in my script. You then could do something with it, and then you could, for example, execute X, which would then run it just as if you had originally called your exec hotkey, right? So it gives you the chance to load into memory an entire script without running it, alter it in some way, possibly adding something to it, removing something from it, and then executing it later. I also haven't found a need for that. You can also do get second. So we could say sec equals get second. And so what that's going to do is it's going to get the second since midnight. So then you could say, hour equals sec divided by 3600. Oops. And then what you would have is hour would equal, a decimal of 1.5 at, 1:30 in the morning kind of thing. That is how I would do math on seconds. We're going to cover objects next. So there is a function called isObject, which will be true or false. Again, upper and lower doesn't matter. So you could say if isObject X do this. So as long as X is an object, it's going to do this. If X is not an object, it's not going to do that. You can also say show object, and you can say X, and what it would do then is it would actually pop up a window in DOS and show you the details of that object. It would show you all the values, all of the methods, any other objects that are nested underneath them. It would show you all that. We covered that in the last video. I showed you some examples of that. You can also use show object rather than show obj. They both function the same. Get alert object. So you could say alert is equal to get alert object, and you can say my alert. And now alert is equal to the my alert object. And then you could use that. So we could say alert dot, and then you can enable it, or whatever you need to do with that object. You can also do that for order equals get order object. And so you can put in a string that defines what you're looking for. and then it will find that order. So then you could say, if is object, because if it doesn't find it, it's not going to be an object. So now we know it found an order that matched this, and then you could start saying things like if order dot, price is equal to, and work with that object at that point. You can also do get quote object. So I could say, stock is equal to MSFT. And then I could say things like stock dot bid, and so I've created my scanner that you've seen in my video where I showed my trading layout. I've got all the stocks across the top. I loop through them, and this is basically what I do is I load stock 1, and then I'll check and see what the last price is, and then I'll memorize it into an object. And if the last price, which is the current price of bar 0, if the last price is greater than 10 cents from the last time I checked it, make a noise, that kind of stuff. So get quote object is very handy. Get Windows object. So you see me use this. I could say get Windows object, and then I could give it a name, my test window or montage or whatever, right? So that's how I'm doing that. New alert object. So I could say alert is equal to new alert object. And now you're building an alert from scratch. So then you would go in and you would define all of its values. At the very end, you would save it. So, you would want to go step by step, adding your alert, tell it what your add items are for criteria on the alert. Basically building out the alert. And again, once you save it, it then is available in DOS. New base window object. So this is not something I've ever, when I read this one, I was kind of surprised. Basically what it does is it creates a new window in Windows. It doesn't create it in DOS. It becomes a new Windows window as far as I understand, and then you can use it from there. The docs on that are a little bit iffy. New order object. I also do this where if I want to create an order, you have a lot more control over it when you do it this way. So you can go in and you can say, I want the price, I'm willing to buy it at $10.44. Order dot buy or send, right at the very end of it. You put in all your different parameters for that order. Another DOS function that just came out August 20th of 2026 in version 5840 of DOS is a new window object. So if I was to say window, if I said new window object, and then I could choose what type of window I want it to be. So I can actually go in and say montage. And now what would happen when that line hits in your code, a new montage window will show up. So then you could go and you could say name, and you could give it a name of montage. And then you could do everything with that you wanted to for the purposes of the montage. You can actually change its XY coordinates on the screen. You can change its ticker, its symbol. You can place orders through that montage window, all on the fly. So you could go from having one montage window to having 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on what you're doing, all with their unique names and logic, just by using that functionality that didn't exist in previous versions. New user object. So we covered this before. You can call this whatever you want, and then you can build off of that once you've created it. You can say, whatever you want to call it. You can add as many parameters to it as you want. I covered that in the objects video. A couple of sound options here. So speak, I use quite a bit. So I've actually got an object that I call miscellaneous, and then I add speak text to it. And then every second, I check to see if the speak text is empty. And if it isn't, I speak it. And so what that allows me to do is in all of my different scripts that are running, I can basically, if I need to say something out loud in DOS, I can say, equals, say this. And then this, which is running actually, I think it's running every couple of seconds, but basically it's going to pick up on everything that's firing all over the place and only speak it in one place, which allows me to keep better control over what's being said. The miscellaneous sound from is either remote sound, I think it is, for my remote desktop, speaker, or headphones. Share stop basically shares the audio stream and stops any previous speaking. So that will basically interrupt anything that's being said. Otherwise, if you don't do that and you get 50 things that are trying to be spoken, they can all stack up and they can actually cause DOS to crash. So I found this is the most reliable way of doing it. Another sound thing is play sound. So here we've got play sound. We're playing an MP3. Again, same logic. We're playing it from the speakers or headphones, and we're interrupting any other sounds. So for string functions, these will be pretty quick. So there is a string find. So you can say x is equal to string find. Haystack means what are we finding it in? So say, large text block. And then the needle is what we're looking for. So we may want to find ABC. And so what we want to do is know where in large text does ABC exist. And then X will then have that value. So say we were searching for BC, and let's say that large text was equal to ABC. Then because we're looking for BC starts at 1, so X would equal 1. So that's handy when you're doing things like, now this is a complicated example, but, analyze MACD value is equal to substring, which we'll cover in a second. String find, it's finding the position of a colon, and then it's adding 1 to it to start after the colon. So that's where it's going to start the substring. And then it's finding a comma, and so it's going to go to that. So it's just a way of you finding start and stop positions within a string by defining what you're looking for. And it can be very handy. So string length, so I could type in variable that, and I could say I want to know what the length of X is. Well, actually, you could just type in here if you wanted to. You could say test, and length would then equal 4. But you can also put variables in here. So then it would return whatever the length of text was, which again can be very handy if you're doing string manipulation. String trim. So if, for example, somehow in your code text was equal to this, string trim will trim off the spaces and basically make it so that it's that. So if you wanted to trim off extra space that's showing up somewhere, string trim would do it. Substring, like I said, we were to say text is equal to substring. The string is going to be, whatever the text is. We're going to start at character 3 and we're going to end at character 7. It would then grab those characters from the text string, and text would now be shortened. By doing this, you're actually replacing the previous version of this variable. So, if that's intentional, that's fine. But if it's not, that way it preserves text. It doesn't alter it. And text 2 would then be the value of characters 3 to 7 in text. So that's that. And then we just got some miscellaneous functions. We're almost done, I promise. So we've got a couple examples here of color. So these are both valid. So basically what this is doing is grabbing an RGB color, where this one is grabbing, and actually I think you have to put quotes around that for that to work. So 255, 255, 255. So that would be white. This is red. You can also put in hex now. That's a new thing they did in the summer. So FFEEDD, whatever. And then my text editor or my code editor actually has a color picker. So that I coded in there. So it makes it a lot easier for me to pick colors. Again, in a future video, I'm definitely going to cover the code editor. If you're interested in that, let me know. So copy text. This is another function. So what this does is it will copy whatever text is in there to the clipboard. So if you had, for example, a script that we got, like we did earlier, where we could copy the source code of a script to a variable, maybe you have a button that when you copy text, it copies that script to the clipboard, and then you go into Notepad and you paste it or something. I don't know. Copy window image, and then you have to specify, I believe, the window name. Yep. So it'd be like montage. And then what that will do is it'll actually take a snapshot, a screenshot of the montage window, copy it to the clipboard, and allow you to paste it to your desktop or paste it into a text chat or something like that. So if you find yourself constantly copying, your charts and stuff like that, you can actually copy the window image for that chart into memory and then paste it into a chat. So you'd create a button or a hotkey to do that, and simply just go Control V or Command V into a chat, and it should paste it. Another one I've never used because I don't trade options, but there is option symbol. So, whatever your symbol is will return true if it's an option symbol. Set symbol note. So this one, I did some testing on this today to figure out how it works, because I have my own way of doing this. So what this does is it sets a note for Tesla. The note name or subject is test, and then the value of the note is this. So whatever you want to remember for Tesla. Then you can use a function get symbol note, and I'll just copy what I have here as an example. So you can say get symbol note for Tesla, the one called test. So if we call this 123, we would then call this 123. And it allows you to create an unlimited number of notes for any ticker. But where it saves these is kind of goofy, in my opinion. It saves them to the local DOS directory in your config.cfg file, which is fine if you're only trading with that one profile. But if you're using multiple computers in any way or anything like that, it's not going to translate over to the other ones. So I save mine using my API, copy it up to the server, and then fetch it from the server when I need it, so that it's available wherever I am, no matter what. It doesn't rely on a local file. And that's all there is with functions. And so hope you found that riveting. My next video is going to be on methods. It's going to be a longer video. There's a lot to review on methods. Methods are a little bit more complicated. They're essentially, if you think of it as functions that belong to objects and are only specific to those objects. So they are powerful. You've used them before if you've done coding in DOS without realizing, maybe, but they are very common to use. It's just there's so many out there that people don't understand that they're even available. So I'm going to be covering that next. Stay tuned. Like I said, if you haven't joined the channel, do that and give it a like. And until next time.